Welcome to this HDIAC webinar. We are HDIAC, which along with CSIAC and DSIAC comprise the DoDIACs. Operating under the Defense Technical Information Center within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense. Our mission is to facilitate interagency collaboration, disseminate scientific and technical information, and reduce redundancy amongst those who support the U.S. government. To achieve this, we offer several free services and contract vehicles, including monthly webinars. Our webinars are hosted by subject matter experts on emerging research and technology topics. Technical inquiries. Submit a question and we will spend approximately 4 hours digging into an answer for you, enough to give you a jump start on your research or project, all at no cost to you. Technical publications. Peer-reviewed reports covering critical technology areas, with focus areas including alternative energy, biometrics, CBRNE, and medical, plus support from our sister IACs. We help navigate the vast landscape of scientific and technical information to give you a research boost. Visit our website to learn more.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor Knight, and I will be your host today. I am the technical lead with DSIAC, a sister IAC to HDIAC. I'm filling in for our technical lead, John Clements, who's out today. But we are very excited to have Michael Prasad with us here to talk about emergency management intelligence. But before we get started, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping notes. So as you saw in our intro video, HDIAC offers a variety of services to the DoD and defense community. One of them is being free research. We offer free research service called technical inquiries, or TIs for short. You can submit any S&T question to our analysts, engineers, and we'll research it for up to 4 free hours. And we'll give you a jumpstart on your research. We can answer questions ranging from the technical focus areas that you saw, biometrics, alternative energy, etc. They can be as broad or as niche as you want, and you can submit it at our website. I'll throw a couple links in the chat after I hand the mic over in a few minutes. So if you're interested, it'll prompt you to log into our member portal, and you can submit the request there. And if you have any questions about that, I can chat with you offline. Also, today's slides can be downloaded from the webinar's website. If you haven't had a chance to grab them, I will also throw the link in the chat. I'll do that a couple times because I know sometimes latecomers miss the beginning of the chat. You can't access it, so I'll do that a few times. And we also have some kind of background reading. Michael Prasad, he also wrote an article, Breaking Through Intelligence Silos for Domestic Emergency Management. So that kind of gives you some background of what we're talking about. I'll throw that link in there as well for you to view and read at your own leisure. If you experience any technical difficulties during this presentation, it is being recorded and will be available on YouTube in a few days' time. Honestly, it usually only takes about 24 hours, so probably by this time tomorrow, you'll be able to access it on the website that I'll, again, throw into the chat. Finally, if at any time during our webinar you have a question, please, I encourage you to ask as many questions as you have. It's just a little bit easier if you can use the Q&A section instead of throwing it in the general chat. You can find the Q&A in the very bottom right corner of WebEx by clicking the ellipses, and then the Q&A should pop up from there. So with that, I am going to introduce Mr. Prasad. Mr. Prasad is a certified emergency manager and president of the International Association of Emergency Managers USA Region 2. He is the executive director of the Center for Emergency Management Intelligence Research and a national level expert on mass care, which involves feeding and sheltering children in disasters. As a professional writer on emergency management policies and procedures, he authored the book titled Emergency Management Threats and Hazards, Water. Mr. Prasad holds a BBA in Management Information Systems from Ohio University and an MA in Emergency and Disaster Management from American Public University. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Michael Prasad.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay, Taylor?
Yes, I can.
The slides are coming up?
They are, I can see and hear you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much. And I have the date wrong on this, but we'll get that figured out. It doesn't really matter. Today's the day. So welcome everybody and thanks again. As I mentioned, I'm Mike Prasad, and as Taylor noted, I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Emergency Management Intelligence Research, or as those who are ready for a ton of acronyms, the CEMR. And you can read more, as I said, about my bio and background beyond what Taylor said in that HDIAC article, which came out June 5th. I believe Taylor said she's going to put it in the chat, so that'll be great that you'll be able to see that whenever you get a chance to look at it. And let's see what else we got. Again, that article's titled Breaking Through Intelligence Silos for Domestic Emergency Management. This webinar is kind of a follow-on for that article. So the webinar will introduce the concept of emergency management intelligence as it relates to U.S. military intelligence curation. So please think of this as an opportunity to connect the various INTs out there, right? OSINT and HUMINT and so forth, for an enhanced command and control of civilian-supported events and incidents. Today, there are predefined gaps in the 7-step process for intelligence curation in the U.S. as it relates to the nexus between military units and civilian authorities. These gaps are currently limiting situational awareness and consequence management for many critical missions in overall emergency management. And I should note these gaps also exist today in a civilian-led only side as well. So we have gaps ourselves when it comes to parts of law enforcement versus emergency management versus fire versus public works versus hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not trying to imply this is a military-only issue, but today's presentation is really going to go into some solutions when it does come out to be civilian support. So, and to be clear, this webinar presentation is focused on the United States and presidentially declared emergencies or disasters, or as what we like to call PRESDECs. These are the big ones, when the capacity and capability of states, local governments, territories, and tribal nations, also known as SLTTs, when they're exceeded and they request federal help. Now, today, there may be an opportunity to expand beyond what is typically known as the Stafford Act set of disasters. So I'll talk about a couple examples that are non-Stafford, but yet had implications of military, U.S. military connections and support. We'll go over that today. Part of this request for assistance from the U.S. federal government may include missions for military and quasi-military units, including both Title 10 and 32 categories. Today, this generally includes state and territorial controlled National Guard units, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Civil Air Patrol, which is activated via the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Coast Guard, to name just a few. There are a ton of mission assignments, or MAs, which are coordinated through the Federal Emergency Management Agency today, FEMA, of course, that further involve U.S. Department of Defense resources. But at this point, unfortunately, intelligence curation processes and systems are not formally part of that process. Not part of that coordination today. Generally, when a PRESDEC is issued, a Federal Coordinating Officer, or FCO, is assigned to align federal support to state and territorial or tribal managed, or SCO. At the same time, 2 Defense Coordinating Officers, or DCOs, are usually aligned, one on the federal side, one on the non-federal side. Occasionally, a state or territorial adjunct general, or TAG, can be dual-hatted and serve in both roles. We saw this in New Jersey in the first week of 2012 Superstorm Sandy from the leadership of U.S. Army General James J. Grant. So here are 6 U.S. military groups just as a sample of the breadth and depth of current civilian support from our military. I'm starting off with the U.S. Coast Guard, and while its role currently moves in and out of the Department of Defense, depending upon mission, the Coast Guard is always responsible for incident command of all incidents which occur impacting inland navigable waterways. And by the way, this has come as quite a surprise to local first responders in more than one incident who are unaware of this jurisdictional shift. NORTHCOM has consistently supported massive joint training exercises with civilian units across the United States. I was an exercise planner for Gotham Shield in 2017. You may recognize this on the DoD side as the annual Arden Sentry exercise for 2017. The U.S. Air Force Auxiliary, the Civil Air Patrol, is routinely mission assigned for aerial surveillance for damage or disaster assessment on large-scale incidents, and teams have also helped with search and rescue efforts as well. The Weapons of Mass Destruction Civil Support Team, or WMD-CST program, is a homeland defense measure intended to help prepare the United States against terrorist use of chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or high-yield explosive (CBRNE) weapons of mass destruction on domestic soil. The North Carolina's National Guard unit responded to Hurricane Helene. They demonstrated the value of leveraging established military processes, such as the Army's Target Working Group, or TWG, Army Target Methodologies, Decide, Deter, Deliver, and Assess, D3A, and targeting products such as the Target Sync Matrix, TSM. And earlier this month of July 2025, the Texas National Guard utilized its MQ-9 Reaper drone to help with search and rescue efforts in Kerr County, Texas. According to OSINT, this was on top of the 230 service members, 8 helicopters, and high-profile vehicles being mission assigned. And by the way, this works both ways too. The private sector provides much needed intelligence on emergency support functions, or ESFs, many of which DoD groups are missioned. And the safety of all responders is also the responsibility of Emergency Management's Unified Command. Civilian response drones were impacting military helicopters and rescue missions in Kerr County, Texas in 2025. There's an example of when you have to coordinate between the civilian unified command authorities to make sure that the military side is staying safe, that helicopters aren't getting down by civilian drones, for example. Healthcare Ready is a non-governmental organization which provides intelligence on public health impacts to U.S. disasters. Things like the status of dialysis centers and pharmacies in the impacted areas. Impacts to the healthcare supply chain, such as the Baxter Intravenous Solution Plant shutdown during 2024's Hurricane Helene. I bring to your attention the primary disconnect from the civilian perspective. Currently, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, view intelligence as a law enforcement-centric only. It's coupled with investigations and does not have a formal placement in the civilian ICS or Incident Command System today as part of the U.S.'s National Incident Management System, or NIMS. This is in contrast to the use and placement of G2 or J2 intelligence, which I believe is from the JP 1.0 personnel series, formerly the JFSC Pub 1. I'm going by an OSINT master's thesis from 2008, by the way, published at the Defense Technical Information Center, the DTIC. I'm sorry, I don't have any sort of access to research this side further, but I think this is the way it's set up. One of the biggest concerns that I have is the siloing of intelligence products via controls and classification. And please know that I am strongly in support of such controls and classifications. I really believe, and you will see some specific examples on the next slide, that there are ways to craft actionable intelligence for local emergency management folks, not just law enforcement folks, without jeopardizing national security. As this is an unclassified presentation, one built completely on OSINT, so therefore should be marked, as I noted here, traffic light protocol clear, I'm not going to go into any of the high side specifics today. In a couple of slides, I'll propose an avenue to get to a middle ground through an existing platform available now on DHS, now from DHS. Another is the ethical and legal concerns around utilizing national security intelligence aimed at the actions and the life safety of U.S. citizens. Part of this is already embedded in the Intelligence Communities Directive, or ICD number 191, Duty to Warn. Again, I bring to your attention 4 OSINT source cases around ICD 191, where undoubtedly the curation, or unfortunately the lack of curation, of intelligence in support of U.S. citizens' life safety was evident. The grading, by the way, in the hazard category in parentheses is mine. Simply put, if someone died or was harmed because of a lack of intelligence sharing, all the way down to the local level emergency management groups who could have done some kind of action to prevent it, it was marked as a fail or a partial fail. So the Jamal Khashoggi case is probably the most obvious one. That's the one that's most written about. Taylor Swift was a couple last year, and this was in Europe, where it was a success that attacks were slated to go against her, and the concerts that she was at somewhere in Europe, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the place, and they were able to interdict against that. I view the U.S. Capitol staff as a workforce on the federal government, and they January 6, 2020 was a fail for them in terms of there were life safety impacts. People were injured and people died. And then, of course, the issue of swatting is something that our Center for Emergency Management Intelligence Research is currently looking at. There are nexus and connections to overseas non-U.S. persons or even foreign terrorist organizations that are working their way all the way down to a specific threat against a specific site, like a school or a hospital. So you can see how there's a need for intelligence curation, meaning including the dissemination and distribution, to make its way all the way down to emergency managers, and not necessarily stop at federal or state level law enforcement. What has recently been promising and is most likely a result of a rapid urgency of increased threats in a very specific arena, as well as the realized life safety impacting hazards, has been an uptick in intelligence sharing for cyber threats, which has synthesized the curation process from what I imagine originated in a classified environment to then a controlled but unclassified information one, and finally made public, and fairly rapidly. We would all benefit from learning if the CISA playbook for this can be replicated elsewhere, beyond cyber threats, to benefit emergency management intelligence curation. Perhaps, for example, through a defense coordinating officer on a pres deck. We've also seen the DHS's Office of External Affairs, for example, in June 2025, put out an OSINT review of Iranian cyber threats as part of a cyber and emergency threats spot report. The FBI has also forwarded a Canadian Center for Cybersecurity co-published report marked unclassified TLP clear on the People's Republic of China's cyber threat activity. The DHS INA Cyber Intelligence Center is now inviting the private sector, via InfraGard, for example, to participate in their biweekly unclassified for official use only TLP Green cyber threat intelligence teleconferences for the private and public sector security professionals. Again, the key is to formalize these intelligence curation processes for the benefit of the totality of emergency management beyond just cyber threats. I mentioned a few slides back about a current platform to share controlled but unclassified intelligence, CUI. This is the Homeland Security Information Network, or HISN, from DHS. HISN access is granted to both governmental and non-governmental personnel for viewing, and has groupings within for various communities of service. Intelligence collection, analysis, and distribution is done by designated state and federal partners, especially law enforcement partners. Homeland Security-centric fusion centers is one example of that. This is the visual for a future state that we hope to see, and we want to help generate in the United States. This is very similar to the model in Australia and New Zealand, Oceania. Note how the elements for protection and prevention do not have to be law enforcement, homeland security, or national defense oriented. Tradecraft from geospatial intelligence systems, for example, can be used for severe weather incidents. The point is all hazards and all threats. They all have civilian-led emergency management impacts before, during, and after incidents occur. We need a continuous framework to support emergency management intelligence, curation, and allow for actionable intelligence to be distributed on an as-needed basis. And we do know there are times when the threat is human-generated, such as the case for domestic violent extremists. They can also generate product process and fictitious disasters as well. Some may only impact a single community, organization, or even individual. And we have found in several emergency management intelligence research aspects that we've already performed on vehicle-borne attacks, on swatting calls to K through 12 schools, for example. Sometimes there are collusions and clashes between groups and individuals, further adding to the complexity of domestic civilian-led incident management. The idea of gray rhinos, black swans, polycrises, and more are definitely in the realm of military intelligence. I put this graphic together back in 2021, based on my personal experiences with threat actors impacting workers at a state-level department where I served in an emergency management role. We had caseworkers who were responsible for protecting children against abuse and violence, in most cases, unfortunately, inflicted on them by their parents. Some of those parents were sovereign citizens. One couple of note were self-proclaimed Nazis, not neo-Nazis, but full-blown old-school Nazis. Our state had 3%ers and people who encouraged others to commit violence for their cause. You can imagine how frustrating it is to be told you have to be out of the loop for law enforcement intelligence, let alone anything involving cross-border threats, which could actually help life safety of those you're responsible for protecting. So I'm going to pose some questions to you. Can we look at the models from international partners for best practices? The United Kingdom is looking at consolidating their SIS, MI5, and GCHQ, possibly applying the joint decision model from the UK's Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Group called JESSIP. Our website at www.cemir.org has other examples from Oceania and elsewhere which can be modeled against. Can the DoD's CDAO group utilize AI to curate emergency management intelligence? Can analytic tools such as Advana and Game Changer be used in the homeland for domestic threats and hazards? And can all this be done with an emphasis on ethical principles? DoD's AI Ethical Principles Responsibility AI, known as RAI, as an example. Don't forget, this does not have to only be intelligence used for investigation or disruption. It could be for public health, such as supporting our National Disaster Medical System, NDMS, syndromic surveillance of emergency Bernie threats, and so forth. And that's it. That's what we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. All right, time for any questions. I know I had just a few at the beginning. Let's see. At the beginning, when you say intelligence curation, do you mean intelligence and integration?
The 7-step process, which is, collection, dissemination. I'm sorry, collection, analysis, dissemination, and so forth. So, what was the specific one? The integration? I would say that's part of it. I don't recall offhand the military's and/or sort of law enforcement's version of intelligence curation. But I should have that memorized. I'm pretty sure integration. The whole point of this is to cross and to eliminate the silos that are out there, not only within the intelligence community, but but also down from the federal to the state to the locals and so forth.
Great. Okay, couple questions. I guess, is there any overlap with the Army's NGC2 program that's headed by Colonel Chris Anderson?
I have no idea. That's
Okay.
a great question. That's probably worthy of a technical inquiry, I think.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So then there was kind of a follow-up loop, I guess, of exploring that, and if there'd be a plan to include technology. I guess it's being developed under Colonel Chris Anderson.
I would love to. I would love to get involved in that and provide, for example, the other side of the coin, meaning how does it look from the civilian side? Two of the examples that I showed up there were the East Palestine train derailment, which was not a Stafford Act declaration, so the president doesn't do the same type of things as gets done during Hurricane Helene or Katrina or whatever else it is, right? Katrina's a really oddball example with general honoraries, coming in and afterwards. That's not the model that I think we want to see in practice. But when it comes to, for example, I would really be interested in what the colonel's got for civilian support, if that's what the grouping is, because and it's really got to be across all of the branches. I bring that up because as I mentioned in the presentation, the Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard, their control of navigable waterways in terms of incident command is really critical. It is pretty obvious and pretty self-contained and focused when you look at something like the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore, right? That's a pretty easy one to say, oh, gee, it makes sense that of the federal agencies, the Coast Guard would be the one in charge, not the Department of Transportation, or certainly not FEMA, because this, again, is not a Stafford Act impact. But it's not so obvious when you look at, for example, a train derailment in New Jersey over what is a creek, basically. But guess what? It was a navigable waterway, and that was my example of when the locals, including the all the way up to the state police, were kind of unaware that suddenly the Coast Guard was in charge. So following through, the chain of command, the structures, the way that the military does its J2s and so forth, the idea of intelligence is going to be there on the military side. The real question is, does it get shared throughout unified command and to the benefit of emergency management?
Great, thank you. Next question. Can you discuss legal challenges between the federal IC operating and sharing/collecting within the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a great one. That's that whole ethical piece that's got to be worked through. I think the answer is that you focus on that ICD 191, the duty to warn, and look to it for guidance. But this is really what needs to be worked out. You need that sort of what if. I'm not asking the CIA to work in the U.S. or anything like that. That's not the point of this. The point is that a lot of times the end result, if somebody were to look and say, gee, would this benefit emergency management? I don't know that question's been asked to then move something from classified to CUI and then further down. The other question that could be out there is when we establish a unified command structure, and in under NIMS ICS, if, for example, it was a Coast Guard led, let's just use that as an example, Coast Guard led civilian support command, where the Coast Guard was leading the logistics group, Coast Guard was leading the finance group, the operations group, right? That's an obvious one, kind of the planning group. If they put in their intelligence group as a lead too, effectively all of those people could very well have classified access and need to know and so forth. So it's not like you're necessarily breaking laws or anything like that, moving intelligence from high side to medium side to low side or whatever. That's not the point of it. It's that you need to plan for these kind of things in advance and effectively work out some of these legal things. I honestly think a couple of tabletops, we could solve almost anything that was out there. I can tell you that the report that I did, that the CEMER did, the Center for Emergency Management Intelligence did on January 6th, that's on our website, CEMER.org. But it has a lot of the references for the federal laws that would need to be tweaked to sort of allow this information or intelligence sharing. Not big tweaks, but there unfortunately are a lot of laws that are involved.
Okay, next question. And I apologize if I am not saying the acronyms correctly. What happened to the full deployment of NIEM, maybe, and FirstNet? Both of these as a network can fill the gaps. It's nothing new. I went to NIEM training in DoD 2011, and FirstNet was to replace the APCO 202 PSAP analog issues.
I don't know NEM. I'm sorry. I am a pretty good expert on FirstNet. So if whoever wrote that question could write out what NEM is, that'd be great. I love learning new acronyms. Uh, and it sounds like it's a DoD related one, unfortunately. And that's a much bigger nut to crack than the fat book from FEMA, right? The federal acronym table is actually an acronym itself. So on the FirstNet side, I can answer that one a little bit, and the answer is it's still a work in progress, even from its originations after 9/11. 24 years ago. We're talking about interoperable communications is not completely the standard across the country, and I'm having a medium level confidence that the implementation can continue forward successfully. And the reason I say medium is that I think the FirstNet Authority, the FirstNet.gov, is doing everything in its power to sort of get as many states and locals and other agencies on board. That interoperability key is part of this sort of 4Cs. It's the communication part to collaboration, coordination, and cooperation are the other 3Cs. Those are principles of emergency management. And I think the sort of downside right now is a number of jurisdictions are sort of being directed or diverted into existing carriers, thinking that they're going to get some kind of interoperability. I do know that FirstNet has just recently built out some programs. I can't remember the name of it, where they'll provide a connection for push to talk across multiple bands, multiple frequency bands, as well as multiple carriers. That's a question that might be a good one. Another one to TI into, related to how does DoD utilize FirstNet to then talk to other agencies in the federal government, to then also talk to other SLTT, right? State, local, territorial, tribal. I can tell you I'm a Red Cross volunteer. I have a FirstNet phone from them. But does my push to talk connect me to the DoD folks or the Coast Guard? That all depends.
Great. Okay, so the NIEM is National Information Exchange Management System.
Wow, that one I don't know. I'm going to have to take that one back for some research. But again, if that's on the DoD side, I might not get too far. But maybe that's something I can work with the HDIAC folks to help get you a better answer.
Okay, next question is, do you see FEMA as a cabinet level agency helping with better curation of information? And do you envision CAT bonds or some other form of funding being used for resiliency planning and training in this area?
Wow, great set of double questions. So as Taylor mentioned at the beginning, I am a volunteer elected representative for the International Association of Emergency Managers USA. I'm the president for Region 2. I'm not speaking on their behalf for this presentation, certainly, of course, but I do agree with their advocacy policy that FEMA should be its own cabinet level position. I believe there is a current federal legislation in the House talking to that point. So I would refer you back to the IAEM.org website. I believe they have a set of about 8 or 9 focal points, all of which I agree with, related to what role FEMA should have in the future. As an example, the question of CAT bonds to support the financing of this, I hadn't really thought of it. I think I thought of this as just sort of being standard practice. What is interesting about the environment we're in today is it appears that the federal government is willing to take a look at the entirety of the national preparedness goal and potentially start with a clean slate, a clean blackboard, and look at things from whatever may work best from the view they see of federalism and states' abilities to support themselves in disasters and so forth. So this may be the opportune time to insert intelligence in as its own branch or sector. I don't think there's a cost necessarily in that, but again, maybe that's something I haven't really explored. But to me, it's like this is already being done. It just isn't done to the level and to the extent and the depth that I think it's needed, and others, of course, as well too, for full support of life safety, incident stabilization, property asset protection, economic and environmental restoration, and recovery. If you're familiar with the fire service, they have the first three letters of those, right? If you have to decide to do something, you save the people first, and then you put out the fire so that it stops the other buildings from burning down. That's how emergency management prioritizes things. But that LIPR, that full list, is kind of a 5-step process of priorities. And I think we're doing all this now. It's just that without the intelligence curation, sometimes that LIP doesn't get connected as well as and as efficiently as it should.
Great questions. Okay, the next question is, what would be the challenges in giving the emergency response coordination mission to the National Guard and fund it to allow FED SLED local team for a converged government response?
Oh, very good question. I'm not sure. I think a lot of that would have to be looking at the training provided to the National Guard. I know that there are a number of Guard units that are very focused, right? There are Guard units that are medical. There are Guard units that are communications. Is there a Guard unit that's intelligence? Probably. I don't know that as a focus. I also don't know if there are Guard units that are that have the totality of incident command, of unified command, of what is effectively the operational, or I should say the response phase for an incident management. That's the part I don't have a good answer to. But on the other hand, I would say that is an ideal group for the type of role that we're looking at to support states, because this isn't really a steady state kind of operation. Unlike, for example, the totality of disaster management is typically, as I mentioned at the beginning, these larger scale incidents that, knock on wood, don't happen every single day. This isn't your steady state going to a fire response or a emergency services level response. This is the thing above that, and even the thing above that, and the one above that. So that is a really good question. I hadn't really explored it from the National Guard perspective of leading the charge, so to speak. Although I do know that they tend to get tasked by governors to be force multipliers. So it makes only sense that they be trained and planned for and equipped and exercised in advance of those missions when they do get assigned. Hope I answered that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next question. I would be interested to understand your thoughts on how best to train those civilians in EM who haven't necessarily had exposure to or formal training in intelligence, such as certain law enforcement, military, or government agencies would have.
I would love that too. You bring up a really good point, and that is, if you take a look at the federal FEMA's guidance on intelligence and investigation, right? There's a responder typing tool. I forgot what it is, the RDLT or something like that. Anyway, what it is it's a tool that tells you you want to be blank. You want to be a forklift operator. You want to be a nurse at a shelter. You want to be something. They give you an example for type 3, type 2, and type 1. Those are the highest levels. FEMA's type 1 is what's happening in Texas, in Kirk County, because of the number of resources, the Helenes, the Miltons, the Harveys, the Katrinas, all of that's type 1. And then it sort of works its way down. Point being is that list also tells you what experience you should have, what training you should take, what qualifications you should have. That's kind of the structure for it. The listing for intelligence and investigations is less than slim. I don't really have guidance as to what to take if I wanted to be an emergency management intelligence specialist. So we'd love to build it. We've seen models from other countries, as I mentioned, and as we have on our website, a number of things from different places. England's, UK's, I should say, gold and silver and whatever they have systems over there. Canada's a bit of a mess because they don't have a national emergency management structure, but they do have ICS there. But again, all of those are not the model for the US necessarily. We still do things very differently here. And I think the issues with states and state controls and things like that, it'd be valuable to have. I will also tell you that the All Hazards, it's now called the Incident Management Team Association, the IMTA. I'm a member of that group as well too, on the I&I group, working group, and we're still trying to figure it out too, what to do. It tends to be very law enforcement, counterintelligence and disruption and things like that. That's where the training lies, and I don't think that's the same as what the IC community, what the three-letter agencies and so forth would think of as intelligence training. Great question, though.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, that was the last one that I see. I'm breathing through. I don't see any newer ones. But if you do have questions and you think of them later and you said, oh, shoot, I wish I could have asked that, Mike's email is right there on the slide. So please feel free to reach out to him. I'm sure he would love to, continue the conversation with you offline. And I'm just waiting to make sure there's no more last minute ones that come in. Okay. I'm going to say that we're going to kind of call it a little bit early today. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. And thank you, Mike. What a wonderful talk. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to present your information to us.
Great. Thanks again, Taylor. And thank you to the HDIAC for this opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Enjoy your day.